So welcome everybody for a Canadian Patriot Talks podcast, where I'm joined today by my good friend Jeff Brown. And Jeff Brown, I think many people have who are watching this already know who he is. He's a prolific author, a radio show host. Jeff is the head of China Rising Radio Sinoland, and the producer of China Tech News Flash, which are these great updates on tech development and science in China. He's the curator of the Bioweapon Truth Commission Global Online Library, and he's an author of a number of books. One of his most popular books, The Big Red Book on China, was the topic of a recent interview that Cynthia and I had with Jeff that a lot of people have watched. Today, Jeff has agreed to take the time to discuss his newest paper, which we've just published on the Canadian Patriot website. It was first published on Covert Action, and it's entitled "The Two Michaels Caught Red-Handed: Spying Against China and North Korea." I found this article to be very, very well done, a comprehensive introduction to the reality that is behind the narratives that were being fed about these poor two Canadians who were held hostage in China as part of an arrogant revanchist policy against Meng Wanzhou, who is rightfully detained in Canada for breaking very important laws that we're never really told exactly what exactly it is that she broke. But that's what we're going to go through today, because Jeff, in this wonderful expose, really did present a solid case that, in fact, these two Michaels, who have just returned home a few weeks ago as national heroes, were in fact connected to some very nefarious agencies internationally that gives us a really good insight into how global geopolitics really works. So Jeff, thank you for coming on today.
Well, Matt, you're a good friend and you're a great host, and I'm happy to be on, and I'm happy to help promote your work and Cynthia's work. And you know, we in the anti-imperial wings, we have to help each other and work together. And so I'm just happy to be on. So thank you for having me.
Amen to that. So to start off, before we really get into the nitty-gritty of your paper, I thought maybe it would be nice to just sort of give people or remind people a bit of the context over why was Meng Wanzhou for over 1,000 days stuck here in Canada. What was that story about, and what was it about the nature of what Huawei is doing that was seen as such a threat, such that this entire scandal was created that unleashed the next 1,000 days of insanity?
Yeah, good question. Very good question. Well, I don't know if you know or recall, but I actually did 4 exposés on Meng Wanzhou and Huawei from the very beginning of the court case until her release September 24th. And so essentially, the United States cannot compete against, and Europe for that matter, cannot compete against China technologically. And Huawei exploded onto the scene in the last 10 years, becoming the world's largest information communication technology company, often abbreviated ICT, and they were unstoppable. And they got on to 5G, got a huge jump on the West, literally caught the West with their socks, with their pants down around their ankles. And Huawei, as is the case with many Chinese companies doing business overseas, are bigger, better, faster, and cheaper. And that's hard to beat. on a level playing field. And
Mm.
so what they did, this all started back. Everybody thought it was Trump. No. This started back with Obama. They started, going after ZTE, and they started going after Huawei, and they started going after, all these high-tech entities in China, because they were just beating the socks off of the American equivalent or the European equivalent. And so I personally believe, with all of my research, that America and Europe, basically NATO, it's a pirate. It's a bunch of pirates and gangsters, and they're sanctioning and fining and illegally, kidnap, arresting people, on trumped up charges, et cetera. And that's what happened with Meng. And so, there's 4 really, really, really good exposés about Meng that just go to my website and search Meng, and they're there. But essentially, what happened is they went back. They had HSBC. That was another really good expose I did on HSBC. They had HSBC in an agreement where they had to basically do whatever the U.S. Department of Justice wanted done, and deferred something agreement. I forget. Anyway, and so anyway, HSBC came up with a really ridiculous scenario, saying that Meng Wanzhou, the CFO, mind you, of the world's largest ICT company and the daughter of the founder, Zheng Zhengfei, they came up with this bogus scenario that she lied during a PowerPoint presentation in Hong Kong about the relationship that Huawei had with a Iranian entity. Mm-hmm. As I recall, I think it's Skynet, and it was just totally trumped up, and it was so bad and so obvious. This was a mafia muscle, kidnapping, and that was on December 1st, 2018, and the Chinese were, outraged, because they knew this was just basically an extortion. Especially the fact that she is the founder's daughter. Yeah. They were hoping, I think, to break him or break her, get her to sing a song, cough up information, and give the United States Department of Injustice, is what I call it, ammo that they would need to go out and attack more people. Mm-hmm. In a quote network. So, and it just so happened that was December 1st, 2018. I immediately started taking notes and writing and finding stuff. Mm-hmm. On December 10th, 9 days later, these 2 Canadians got arrested. They got dubbed the 2 Michaels, Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor. And of course, as you mentioned, it was immediately, oh, this is just, the geopolitical
tit for tat, retaliation.
Prisoner swap, blah, 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 blah. And it, to be honest with you, outside of China, outside of Canada, their story didn't go that far. Mm-hmm. But it was a big deal, as you know, in Canada. Yeah. And I kind of forgot about the guy. I mean, because I was so involved with all this horrific stuff that Meng was being put through. I just concentrated on all of my exposés on Meng, and then I got pages and I even subscribed to McLean, the Canadian magazine, to get some articles about the 2 Michaels. I think I gave you the username and password, because I'm never going to use it. And so, but I got what I needed, and so anyway, they were just kind of forgotten. And then, other than the Canadian press, oh, they're being mistreated. We can't visit them. The trials are not public, and the authoritarian, secretive, inhumane Chinese government, mistreating our poor innocent citizens. Blah, 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 blah. And so I just kind of forgot about it for like 2.5 years. And then, Spavor got convicted. He was convicted.
Like 11 years, right?
Yeah, 11 years back in the summer. And so then I started paying more attention to it. And then things kind of got ahead of it. Things just kind of got rolling. And Meng was released on September 24th. And several hours later, the two Michaels were released.
Yeah.
And of course, this gave the West the ability to say, see, it was just a prisoner swap.
Yeah.
But as I really did my homework, I mean, there is absolutely no doubt that these guys were spying. I'm not saying they were, Kim Philby or, some James Bond, but they were spying.
Yeah.
For Western Empire, and they got caught.
Exactly. And I thought you did a great job with that, and you even make the point that these are not only are they not Kim Philbys, they're more like, as you call them, second-tier James Bond wannabes. But they were definitely implicated in something very serious. And I know from our standpoint here in Canada, the media was always trumpeting up how the Chinese government was being so secretive and opaque with their hearings about the Spavors, and they weren't releasing the evidence. And on the one hand, you do make a very good point as well in your article that this is not some like low-level court case. This is high-level intrigue, espionage, and it's a bit hypocritical because we do our own cases. We have a Guantanamo Bay. We have all sorts of whistleblower crackdowns inside of courts where nobody gets to see the evidence, and people just disappear all the time in North America. But we don't complain about that. But all of a sudden, we're not getting every single piece of data from the case in China, and all of a sudden, we're freaking out. That's
we have to remember that when there's an espionage trial, and these guys were admittedly low level, low-hanging fruit. They were not. It was basically taking pictures of infrastructure and military, personnel and that kind of stuff. But let me just regress. I do want to point out, though, that the pictures that were being taken, at least by Spavor, we don't really know what Kovrig was. He may have just been the mule taking this stuff back to Hong Kong. But intelligence analysts, everybody has satellite photos. We all have the bird's eye view of everything on the planet. But intelligence analysts, they want to see it from the front. They want to see it from the back. They want to see it from the left, and they want to see it from the right because that way they can say, an RPG right there will just bring that whole thing down, or some C4 explosive right over there will completely disable this mother, So they do like these kind of, basic photographs of infrastructure, machinery, dams, planes, trains, automobiles, etc. Yeah. There's a Canadian movie, John Candy, and so yes, they were kind of punky photos, but they are useful for intelligence analysts for an eventual attack, sabotage, etc. So low level but useful. And as I pointed out, obviously, in any espionage case, the agents who caught them are going to be identified. Modus, how they do their espionage is all fleshed out. We then saw you do this, and then we then saw you do that, and then you went here and you went there. that would be basically handing the West China's espionage playbook. And
Yeah.
so they're not going to let, as I think the joke was, as I said in my expose, that this is not traffic court in Omaha, Nebraska. You know, this was an espionage case. But again, the Western, you know, what I call the big lie propaganda machine, used it to vilify China for being opaque and not being open, and the ambassador couldn't go, and the consular officers couldn't go to court and all that. What a bunch of rubbish! Of course they can't go. So anyway.
On that note, I mean, you're making the point here. So before we look at a little bit of who exactly the two Michaels were, especially Kovrig, I find that he's the best gateway into the machinations of the color revolutionary apparatus, which has been running rampage over nation states for over 3 decades, really. But before we do that, let's just say a little bit more about the strategic value, since Spavor was the one who was sort of situated on the ground at a certain strategic region between North Korea, China, and also that involves Russia a little bit.
Russia, yeah.
And so since he was the one on the ground taking the pictures, as you pointed out, there's even some evidence that's come to light of a certain operation of him burying cell phones in a certain location that were then captured by certain networks. So maybe you could say a little bit more about the strategic value of this region, the BRI, maybe the Rison. Why would the West be so interested in that zone specifically?
Well, you know, China and Russia are big time allies, and even in the worst of times, neither of them would ever let anything, you know, bad happen to North Korea, because North Korea is a massive buffer between their countries and South Korea. I mean, if North Korea didn't exist, the United States could have, you know, nuclear missiles literally across the Yalu River from Russia and China. Russia only has about a 12-kilometer sliver of land connecting to North Korea, but it's enough for train tracks and roads and bridges and etc. China has all the rest. China has a massively long border with North Korea. Most of it the very shallow and narrow Yalu River, and so it is a flashpoint. And as I exposed in my piece, in spite of all of the sanctions and everything, there's Russia and China do a lot of business with North Korea. I mean, it's just, you know, the United States can't control it. There are millions of North Koreans in China. I'm sure they are in also, you know, on the Russian side, you know, to do business and trade. There's massive amount of trade going on, roads and bridges all along the border with China, and there's no way that when a 2-kilometer long train rolls in from China into North Korea with covered cars, nobody can see what's in them, you know. And so, and just a lot of commerce. It's a shallow river. In many places, you can wade across it. It's kind of like the Rio Grande in between Texas and Mexico. And so North Korea is vitally important to Russia's and China's security. And as you know very well, North Korea is not the insane nutball country that the West tries to portray. And they've got some of the best missile technology in the world. They've got some of the best tunnel technology in the world, which has all been, you know, used by Hezbollah in Lebanon, by Iran. So North Korea is the unspoken 800-pound gorilla, so to speak, in geopolitics in Asia. And so Spavor happened to, fall in love with Korea, got his start in South Korea, and then joined a Canadian cross-cultural NGO. And it's very common for people doing business for non-North Koreans to be based in China simply because communication is better, infrastructure is better, the daily life is better. I mean, North Korea is somewhat austere and hard-nosed, and it doesn't have all the incredible features that a city in North Korea might have, and so they, a lot of them do that. They do the cross-border thing, and as I pointed out, most flights into North Korea pass through Beijing anyway. So you want to go down there and meet the airplane or whatever, and then and then fly back to Pyongyang. So it makes a lot of sense for non-North Koreans, both Western, Russian, etc., to stay right on the other side of the North Korean border. It's so porous, and so I called it the Yalu River Bazaar in my expose. There's so much commerce going on, and there's almost 2.5 million Chinese are of Korean ethnic origin. I mean, they speak Korean and they are Korean. So it's a hugely important area. And I talked about the Rasan Special Economic Zone. China and Russia are doing a lot of investing in that North Korean Special Economic Zone. Spavor helped with all of their international fairs. And I can probably bet you $50 that Kovrig was up there, snooping around too, since he was with the ICG. So it's a flashpoint and extremely important in this story.
Absolutely. Now, okay, so I think we should just shift gears a little bit here, because the matter of Spavor is interesting and weird, and you make the point it's somewhat tragic that a guy who had so much potential, he was definitely he was positioned in a very strategic, unique situation where he was doing good things, I would say, in terms of being a cultural diplomatic bridge, facilitating intercultural exchange that was vital for getting Trump to meet up with Kim Jong-un, and bringing in Dennis Rodman as well, and all these fun things that
Mike Pompeo also. Mike Pompeo,
and Pompeo,
exactly. Secretary of State,
and so he was definitely somebody who's he very much sabotaged his career path and the good he was doing by choosing to go into or agree to be a part of this other more insidious operation. We don't know, and you make a point, we don't know what his motives were, if there was blackmail or if they had something on him or whatever. We don't know. We have no idea. But we do know that his friend, Michael Kovrig, does, however, give us a much better insight into the process. You just brought up ICG, the International Crisis Group. Could you say a little bit something? Because I think this is where a lot of the smoking guns happen. What is Kovrig's story? What ties him into this Soros operation? What is ICG?
Yeah. Kovrig, I used to work, in Africa and the Middle East a lot, and I've met a lot of diplomats, and there's a lot of spies and embassies all over the world that are undeclared. You're supposed to declare, like the CIA guy and the Defense Intelligence guy, but there's there's a lot of them that are non-official cover, and so. And that's true in the Canadian embassy, American embassy, Chinese embassy, French embassy, it doesn't matter, they're there. And so intelligence is a huge part of diplomacy, regardless of, which side you're on. Kovrig was I have met a lot of Michael Kovrigs in my career. traveling all over Africa, the Middle East, and Asia. And he got the classic start. He went to university and he got a degree in international relations, and then he learned French at the Sorbonne in Paris, and then he got involved in the UNDP, the United Nations Development Program. This is classic stuff. I mean, this is just, and he got some postgraduate, certificates and stuff in the interim, adding, padding his CV, and then he turned some heads, and he got hired by the Canadian Diplomatic Corps. And that's where it started to kind of, get a little bit goosey, because he chose national security. Well, national security is what Zbigniew Brzezinski did. I mean, these are the people who, plan. Their goal is to keep the country from being, overtaken, and that includes treaties, diplomacy, and war and military. So that's where he really started kind of getting into the sort of the intelligence defense area. He became a manager of a group of people who were doing this for the Canadian Diplomatic Corps based in Ottawa. And then he obviously impressed people. I mean, he's obviously he's probably a pretty savvy guy. I mean, he's probably a pretty good, he's probably a pretty impressive person to meet and talk to. And so he got promoted to the embassy in Beijing, and there he became functional in Mandarin. And at that point,
and he wasn't just at the embassy, right? He was like the third in command or something.
He essentially, when he got sent there, he got promoted to lieutenant colonel. I mean, in military parlance. I mean, that's a big jump. So he obviously was a golden boy, and the Western embassies, are involved in all kinds of nefarious NGOs, etc. And he started to do work for the Rhodium Group, which is a Beltway bandit in Washington, that was doing a project on China. And he got involved in that. It was run by the Atlantic Council. And of course, as you and I know, the Atlantic Council is like the who's who of every psychopath in Washington and Europe. And, just every, generals, defense secretaries, Henry Kissinger, Hillary Clinton, who we both love and adore. And
James Baker,
so,
Condoleezza Rice.
Just on and on. And he apparently became intoxicated with this group of people by working with the Rhodium Group. What was so interesting, is that he was doing this, and then he got picked up by the International Crisis Group. Well, the and what's also so interesting about this is that he was still getting his Canadian diplomat salary. So here he was, rubbing shoulders with off the chart, neoliberal hawks,
neocons, neo-hawks,
exactly.
Like the world on fire.
He was still getting paid by the Canadian embassy. And then he started working for ICG. Well, ICG is International Crisis Group, and as soon as you hear the word George Soros, the name George Soros, well, this is not the Red Cross. And so, everybody knows George Soros is the financier of untold numbers of color revolution. His open society is a cookie cutter for destabilizing countries all over the world. ICG, talks about, bringing peaceful resolution of conflicts around the world, which is, basically Gene Sharp of the CIA. It's just Orwellian doublespeak, and the ICG is everywhere that the U.S. has and Europe has their nose in a color revolution, would be it Burma, Myanmar, Thailand, Ethiopia, Latin America, Africa, Asia. And as I was doing, they're funded by millions and millions of dollars by every kind, MacArthur and Rockefeller, and it's a nightmare.
Mm-hmm.
And also the Canadian government, the US government, NATO governments fund this thing because it is a perfect color revolution storefront for sabotage and government overthrows around the world. Well, Michael Kovrig became the head of Northeast Asia. Well, Northeast Asia is China, North Korea, and Russia and that part of the world. And so you cannot work for George Soros and not be a color revolution agitator. And I even wrote about it. In fact, when I first heard Kovrig got arrested back in 2018, I immediately did just a quick article saying, ICG, he is a spy. It was not a long article, but I said, if you work for ICG, you are a spy. Mm-hmm. And then I did nothing else. So ICG, they've everywhere. Afghanistan. It's just, I could have written a list, much longer than I did. Iraq. They are everywhere where the United States and Europe are trying to destabilize their enemies, principally China. And this is the one thing that I did notice when I was doing my research is ICG has a nose for going after countries that cooperate with China mm-hmm. in the Belt and Road Initiative, mm-hmm. infrastructure, diplomacy, etc. And so Kovrig is not, and then so after he left the diplomatic service, and for 2 years he pretended to be a Canadian businessman traveling along the border of North Korea in Jilin, which is the province in China that's right up next, that runs most of the length of the North Korean border. He was, the Ministry of State Security in China is pretty savvy. They're the CIA of China, and they're really, really good at what they do. And they're very, very good. Like I think they probably run circles around the CIA and MI6. And so, of course, they were watching him. He was based in Hong Kong. China has agents all over Hong Kong watching the 1,000. Well, before the national security law, there were 1,000 people working in the U.S. consulate in Hong Kong, and they were not there for chop suey. Yeah. And so they were watching him every step of the way. I'm sure they had this guy nailed from the first, but again, this was low level stuff. They were probably like, well, let's see what he does. Let's see who he contacts. Let's see how he works. Mm-hmm. I'm sure they were tracking both these guys for several years.
Well, and that's what just blows my mind, the lack of sophistication, which I suppose is tied to the arrogance of this beast, which has gotten away with so many illegal activities for so many decades that the type of sensitivity to sophistication, which was once appreciated during the Cold War era, or the period of Kim Philby's multi-level infiltration of governments and
Philip AG and
yeah. Now they've just dropped all of that, and he might as well be walking around in China now at this point with a T-shirt saying "I am not a spy" or something like that. Don't look at me. It's just so it makes you really.
Well, as I pointed out, he's still Michael Kovrig is still on the ICG website. So for 2 years, he was running around China, taking photos, doing this, doing that, gathering information, and he was still on the ICG website. And yet he was. You don't think China's MSS didn't maybe take a look at the ICG website? I mean, of course they did.
Yeah,
he was still ICG, and he was running around China calling himself a Canadian businessman. And ICG could not qualify for China's new foreign NGO control law,
right.
Management law in 2016, 2017. They didn't even try to qualify because they would, the Chinese knew they were a revolution color revolution cookie cutter. So it's just it's like, come on, man. I mean, this is like not even, it's almost like incompetent. But as you say, it is because of this cultural superiority complex that the West has, and their inability to understand that, well, maybe their adversaries are just as smart as they are, smarter.
Well, that's the thing, and I think the greatest I think point of weakness that this empire currently has is its own arrogance, which is, on one hand, it gives me a certain amount of optimism and heart just seeing it systemically flop time and again and again and again, based upon the momentum it has from its past successes, leading up all the way till the destruction of Libya. But the script that it is operating on, because this beast doesn't seem to be very renowned for its creativity. The script that it was operating on a decade ago no longer applies to the new configuration of the world, with the BRI having blossomed since they burnt Libya. Their regime change operations everywhere they try them, whether it's in Venezuela or whether it's in Syria. Nothing's working. Hong Kong, nothing's working. Yemen, exactly. Every single thing, the formula that used to work like a magic spell, every time the magic spell doesn't work anymore. But they're still doing it. And I got to tell you, one thing that's an irony that just struck me when I was reading your paper and looking into the International Crisis Group as well. Such an irony. The only reason I personally know of the ICG and the Soros operation was because I was doing a series of reports around the time of the last elections, and I found in the United States. And I found myself on a path where I had to figure out this Mark Malloch Brown, George Soros operation, because I won't say anything in detail because I want this video to stay on YouTube. So I can't go into any details here, but you can't understand what the hell happened in the United States with a certain color revolution that did happen there without understanding the dual guiding role of George Soros, who is tied to something called Dominion voting systems, and Mark Malloch Brown, who is tied to something called Smartmatic, which worked and dovetailed for a very long time in creating various types of frauds in Philippines and many other places. They ran a color revolution in the US. This forced me to look at, well, what else have they done together? Which is, they co-created the ICG back in 1995, along with co-creating the International Criminal Court. And he's also the president of the Open Society Foundations. And the ICG is also a former guy who just ran it up until a few months ago, was Robert Malley, who was a Rhodes Scholar, who was the president of the International Crisis Group, who was Obama's point man for ISIS, and now is the point man to the U.S. Special Representative on Iran, now under Biden.
Oh, that's right.
It's the same agency that's out to destroy China and Russia and all the countries. It's the same agency that just did the thing in the United States. It's the same. It's not one nation versus another. And that is, for me, a really useful gateway to get people out of this fallacious nation versus nation framing that we've all been put into, and realize that there is this higher power above
Yeah.
nations,
Yeah.
which is a great gateway. This Kovrig thing I find for me was a wonderful gateway right into the heart of that beast. It's such a good
Yeah. Yeah.
device.
Yeah. Yeah. He, I think a lot of diplomats become, they drink the Kool-Aid.
Mm-hmm.
They and I think maybe they're bored, maybe their domestic life isn't the way they wanted it to go or whatever. And as we always talk about, the imperial toolbox, blackmail, bribery, extortion are always there. And we even Kovrig, I doubt it. I think Kovrig just became drunk with the Atlantic Council and the Rhodium
Being around
Group
the
and
power.
the power of these people and George Soros and I'm sure they're very engaging people. I mean, so was Hannibal Lecter in Silence of the Lambs.
Right.
And so yeah, and then Kovrig, he had Dennis Rodman. He got Dennis Rodman. I mean, this guy, Dennis Rodman, was not a second string basketball player. He was a 5-time NBA champion, considered one of the best defensive players ever in the game. He's in in fact, I even wrote an article about him. It's in my second book, in one of the chapters of my book. And he's a character. But the fact that Kovrig was doing that, and he could get Rodman to meet Kim Jong-un, in person to person 3 times, and get Rodman to Korea 7 times, and bringing over, Canadian National Hockey League players, and restore. He had the world by the tail, and I still sometimes go to bed going, what the hell happened?
Mm-hmm.
And but I suspect it was, maybe he might have been depressed. It might be emotional. He might have some psychological problems, but more than likely it's probably due to blackmail, bribery or extortion. So
yeah. Well, that's
anyway,
one thing
it
you make
just
a point. We can't really know. We can infer and triangulate, but we can know some things. And I think for those things that we can know, you very much displayed very coherently what those elements of the case are. And I think also when people look at the body of your work, your podcasts, your writings, your books, there's there's a consistent ability to get into the mind of an imperialist and also to see its weaknesses. What are imperialists? No matter what part of the world you're from, right? If you think like an imperialist, you have certain Achilles heels. So I really appreciate that you hammer at those heels, and that's what we all need to do. And for anybody who wants to look a little bit more into your work, obviously I'm going to have links to your articles on Meng Wanzhou, on the 2 Kovrigs, in the description box of this video. But if people want to know more of your work or buy your books,
I'll send them to you.
Okay.
I'll send it all to you.
Great. So thank you, Jeff.
Thank you for having me on. I guess I'll have to do an expose on Schellenberg.
You know what? Let's actually do a little teaser for that expose on Schellenberg, because I forgot that was a little addendum you had to the updated version of that article. So there's a third Canadian that's often forgotten.
Robert Schellenberg.
Robert Schellenberg, who's on. He's awaiting the end of his days currently in China. There was Justin Trudeau and others did try to cry crocodile tears and raise scandal about this, and again, the media coverage of this is so dishonest in Canada. It really does make it seem as though he's somebody who was on maybe like petty drug charges for selling some dime bags or something in China, and he shouldn't have, and now they've given him the death penalty. And it's like, no, when you actually look at his track record as you went through and what he did get charged with, you want to say a little something about this and what lesson this can give us?
He was convicted 18 times. Think about that.
Yeah.
18 times in Canada on drug dealing and DUI. He has he has a drug addiction problem, but he was in and out of prison, and he wasn't selling. You know, Acapulco Gold. He was selling methamphetamine. I mean, this is a deadly drug that has ruined the lives of millions of people around the world. He was a big time dealer. So he after those 18 convictions, I guess he went to Dalian, China, which is up in the northern part of the country, and tried to do a deal where he would send 227 kilograms of methamphetamine to Australia. That's 500 pounds. That's a huge methamphetamine. I mean, you only need a little tiny spoonful, and so it was a huge deal. He got caught, and this is what people don't want to talk about. He originally was given, I think, only 15 years in prison in China. There was such moral outrage in the Chinese public. The public was up in arms that this guy, first off, he humiliated China by doing something internationally, with trying to ship it to Australia. Mm-hmm. So it was a huge loss of face for the Chinese in terms of international relations. And it was a big, big bust. And so my wry name for the Chinese leadership, Baba Beijing had to send it back to the court to reassess his sentence because the public was not going to stand for it. Mm-hmm. A 15-year, and they knew all the 18 convictions in Canada. And as I wanted to, China is a very conservative society socially and culturally. It's Confucian, it's Taoist, it's Buddhist. And so for that, they came back and they said, he's going to get the death penalty. And of course, the West is using this as, the barbaric Chinese, not to mention that, the United States and NATO and, execute many people all over the world without a trial, and drone people to death without a trial. But it just goes to show you. And as I said, Canada, why didn't you get this guy some help? Why at least put him in a mental hospital?
Yeah.
Something, get him off the streets. He's obviously a very, very troubled individual. So anyway, he's back up to the death penalty. I don't know what's going to happen. They may they can hold him in custody for years and years and years. I'm sure that China will decide what to do at the appropriate time. But I just thought it was interesting that we had all this stuff with the two Michaels and Meng Wanzhou, and then Robert Schellenberg, the major methamphetamine drug dealer, Canadian drug dealer.
And part of this too is on top of the insight one gets from the two cultures, the Western liberal insanity versus a conservative culture that, What's that?
Wokeism.
Yeah, this absurd rainbow fascism type of thing that's just completely turned our society into a walking mockery of itself, versus an actual society that cares about, that doesn't believe in relativism, that cares about its future, that cares about certain cultural standards. There's two different very things. But then at the other hand, there's an irony too, that China is given so much flack for, there's so much spin and reframing in our media for China being the culprit behind the flooding of the West, of Australia and Canada and the US with drugs as part of this revenge of the opium wars from the back in the day. And it's like, well, wait a minute. On the one hand, no, that's mostly coming out of Hong Kong. But on the other, then you actually have provable, demonstrable foreign operatives who have been spread all throughout China, who are actually doing this, like this Canadian guy, like Schellenberg, And China's actually cracking down on these things and trying to carve out this parasitical thing. So it's not the Chinese government sending the stuff. They're trying to help us by stopping the outpouring of drugs from their society.
Absolutely.
So anyway,
I thought that was a nice little rejoinder at the end, just to kind of compare the two cultures. So
it absolutely.
Thank you so much for having me on.
No, of course, Jeff Brown. Thank you so much for coming on, and I hope to do another one again in the near-term future. And take care. Have a great 2022.
Hey, and I'll get you and Cynthia back on my show.
Say the word. We're there.
How about that?
All right. We love it. Looking forward to it.
Bye-bye. Take
Bye.
care.
Ciao.